continuing on from Carla's message earlier about utilizing science for change, we've invited some Filipino trailblazers to share their work and inspire the younger generation. So our first guest is Kirby Aurelio. He is the co-founder of the Bulasan Center, the first center for Filipino studies in a major American university. He is a historian, an author, an educator, an activist, a datu, and one of the strongest voices in the Filipino cultural heritage sphere. We are so grateful and honored to have Kirby here today with us to speak about the history of Filipino sciences. Thank you for being here, Kirby.
There you go. Thank you. You can hear me, right? Because my mic was acting up earlier. But yeah. Again, yeah, thank you for having me, for inviting me to be part of your celebration of your 1-year anniversary. Yeah, thank you, Afsa. And for today, I was asked to talk about share a little bit about the history of Filipino scientists and how they use science to create change in the community. And this phrase is just a reminder for all of us to, the importance of knowing our history is also about knowing ourselves. And it comes from this Tagalog phrase, ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan, which means that you cannot look back to where you come from where you came from, then you cannot really reach your destination. So it's a good reminder for us. But yeah, today I'll be sharing a story about something that is, I figure I'd share something that is both familiar and unfamiliar for many of us. Today, if we visit, especially for Filipinos in America, if we visit Filipino grocery stores here in the United States, we'll find aisles of banana ketchup. And I bet many of us here in the diaspora have always wondered why make ketchup out of bananas, because ketchup have always been associated with tomatoes. Why do Filipinos have ketchup that is made of banana? Which sounds weird, especially if you're not Filipino. But yeah, the history of banana ketchup and its creator truly embodies this theme of using science to uplift our communities. So where did banana ketchup come from? And that's the picture of the creator of banana ketchup, Maria Rosa. So the beloved banana ketchup of Filipinos. The beloved Filipino banana ketchup dates back to World War II. It was created by Maria Ilagan Rosa, a Filipino scientist, Filipino food scientist, and a war hero. And this unconventional condiment was invented in the thick of World War II. Oops. So yeah, why do you think a scientist would create a ketchup out of banana in the middle of war? So yeah, to understand the true significance of banana ketchup, we must really look at what was happening when Maria Rosa was in the Philippines during World War II. Yeah, so the beloved Filipino banana ketchup again dates back to World War II, and the creator of it is Maria Rosa, who was born in Taal, Batangas. So if you're from Batangas, she's one of your people from Batangas. So she was from Taal, Batangas. She was born November 29, 1892, and she had an impressive career. So she earned her degrees from the University of Washington in Seattle. This is a picture of the university in 1920, a year after she graduated. So again, she graduated in 1919, and she even served as one of the youngest assistant state chemists for the state of Washington. So that was already impressive during that time. Especially she's a person of color, a scientist of color, and two, she's a woman, and she was young. So that was already an achievement. And she was an accomplished pharmaceutical and food chemist, and she had a promising career here in the United States. And she even impressed the leading food scientists of the time. But instead of choosing her own career advancement, instead of choosing to make money for herself, instead of choosing to stay in the United States, Maria is a true patriot at heart, and she loved and cared for our people back at home in the motherland. So Maria returned to the Philippines in 1922, and she had this steadfast conviction to help address the ever-worsening crisis of malnutrition and food security in the Philippines. She worked hard to invent many types of food to minimize the need for imported products to feed the Filipino people. And again, one of the inventions during this time was banana ketchup. So she brilliantly took advantage of the abundance of the native crops, because if you've been to the Philippines, the islands of the Philippines are actually one of the most richest when it comes to natural resources. We have a lot of plants, we have a lot of minerals, we have a lot of fruits, we have a lot of things in the Philippines. Yet the economy is, but that's another topic for another day. But today, yeah, so she took advantage of the abundance of our natural resources and native fruits and vegetables in the Philippines to make the country really self-sufficient to make in terms of feeding its people. So this is one of her invention, which is a cookie, a darak made from darak, which is from rice. So, so in fact, banana ketchup wasn't even her most important invention. So during World War II, she actually joined the guerrilla forces during World War II to fight for the freedom of our land from Japanese invasion. And in the thick of the war, she invented Soyalak, a nutritious soybeans drink, and the cookies that you saw earlier, which is rich in vitamin B1, and it was known as darak. And these are food inventions that saved many lives, countless lives, during during the heat of World War II. And she created a lot. She invented a process to can food in the Philippines to easily feed the guerrilla warriors fighting the front lines, fighting for our people's liberation. And she was really fearless. In fact, she even found ways to smuggle the food to feed the people inside the internment camps, the Japanese concentration camps, inside the prisoners of war. So she found ways to really smuggle food in there to feed the people who were suffering during World War II. And without her remarkable food inventions, thousands would have died during World War II. Her magic food saved many lives, from those again in the concentration camps to those in the hospitals and out in the streets. And it was not just Filipinos, but countless of Americans, British, and other foreigners as well. So she saved a lot of lives during World War II. And her resourcefulness and diligence and boundless imaginations makes her a true hero. If you're not familiar with World War II damages in the Philippines, Manila was one of the most damaged cities in the world during World War II. In fact, if you don't count the cities in Japan that were bombed by the atomic bombs, Manila was the second most destructed city in World War II. The first one would be Warsaw in Poland. So Manila was truly devastated. The pictures you see here is back then it was the Congress of the Philippines, which is now the National Museum. And yeah, so this is another picture of Manila, how ruined Manila was during World War II, just to give you a visual of how much suffering our people was facing during World War II. And when Manila was actually falling in World War II, Maria actually refused to evacuate Manila with her family because her family told her to come back to Batangas. It was safer there, but she said no. And she told her parents, "I cannot abandon my work. I need to stay in Manila." And she bravely faced war and again invented food and fought in the front lines during the war and fed many people and helped save lives during World War II. And then sadly, on February 13, 1945, Maria Ilagan Rosa was hit twice by a shrapnel while she was in the line of duty in Manila, defending our people, defending our land. So she dedicated she dedicated her life's work in her mission to really empower the Filipino people to make our country, the Philippines, self-sufficient when it comes to food security, to make the Philippines really independent in meeting the basic needs of our people. Unfortunately, her dreams of self-sustaining Philippines is still far from reality. Sadly, the Philippines, despite being an agricultural country, being rich in natural resources, the Philippine economy still relies on the importation of food, such as rice. So imagine that rice, which was once abundant in the Philippines, now our country needs to import rice to feed our people. So this really makes me wonder, what would Maria Orosa do if she sees the Philippines today? And this brings us to the theme of AFSA this year, which is, Angat, which is utilizing science for change. And Angat, as probably mentioned earlier, it's Tagalog word to mean lift and uplift. And Maria Rosa really uplifted the Filipino people through her science, through inventing food that nobody would have thought of. And yeah, so hopefully we find inspiration from the life of Maria Rosa Ilagan or Maria Ilagan Rosa and the countless of Filipino scientists throughout history, in utilizing science for change and in uplifting our communities. Especially, actually, this year's Filipino American History Month theme nationally is actually celebrating the Filipino activism, not just the history of Filipinos in America, but also the history of Filipinos, activist Filipinos. One thing I learned from my dad, who was an activist in the Philippines in the 80s, was that there was no perfect activist, and you don't always have to be in the front lines. Being an activist is really using what you have, your own talents, to uplift the community. So if you're a scientist, then definitely use science to uplift the community. So hopefully we find inspiration in her life. And this is her tomb. Fun fact, her tomb was actually thought to be lost forever until February this year, right before the quarantine in the Philippines. They discovered the tomb in Manila. So it was lost for a very long time, and now they found it. So yeah, I hope that we find inspiration from her life. And yeah, maraming salamat.
Thank you, Kirby, for going through that wonderful history. I'm sure you could think of many historic examples of Philippine scientists.
Yeah,
Do we have that time for one?
There's a lot. There's actually a lot, and a lot of them are actually women.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully, maybe we will have another office
Yeah.
event potentially. Okay. So our next guest is Dr. Virginia Cuevas. So I will keep this short because that's she told me to. So she is a dedicated professor for 34 years, more than for 34 years, specializes on plant and fungal ecology. She developed the trichoderma microbial inoculant, which is a biofertilizer that also acts as a biocontrol agent for fungal diseases in crops. And we are honored to have Dr. Cuevas here today to speak to us about environment biology and trichodermal microbiology. So take it away, Dr. Cuevas.
Okay, good morning. I would like to share screen. Uh, okay, can you see it now?
Yes, you can see it.
Good morning to audience in the Philippines. Good evening to the audience in US. Thank you very much, Association of Filipino Scientists in America, for inviting me to be part of your anniversary celebration. My work, my presentation is entitled Environmental Biology and Trichoderma Microbial Inoculant from Basic Research to Policy Brief and a RISE program. I started doing research in 1980. I was just an MS graduate at the time. And I capitalized on my understanding of the decomposition process, which came about from my MS thesis. And my PhD is in mycology, and I did a detailed study of the genus Trichoderma from the Philippines. From this basic research, I produced two traditional biotechnology products, which are used in agriculture. They're environment friendly and improve yield with minimal cost to the farmers. Now, the first product is Trichoderma harshanum, which is used as an activator for rapid composting. And the second product is Trichoderma microbial inoculant. It is a biofertilizer, biofungicide, and growth promoter. And UPLB got a patent for this product, and patent is assigned to me. And now the product is commercially available. Now, my works have strong scientific basis supported by publications and my own publications from all over the Philippines, from all over the world. Because the different species of trichoderma are important in agriculture and industry. So an example of that will be the biotechnology, biology of trichoderma, a book that was published in 2014, authored by many different scientists from all over the world. So my area of expertise is plant and fungal ecology and environmental biology. My research sites are all in the field, especially in the rural areas, and this travel to these rural areas give me an understanding of the conditions of our Filipino brothers, and I discover more environmental problems. So an example of that project is in Bataan, Morong Bataan, which is the reservation area for the Aitas. And in this picture, I was demonstrating how to make compost from materials from their immediate environment. The compost will be used as a potting medium for native tree seedlings to be planted in the denuded areas in the reservation. Now, on the environmental biology aspect, I conducted simultaneously both basic and applied research. Basic research, which was funded by National Research Council of the Philippines, is on vegetation analysis of areas covered by mine tailings in northern Luzon. And the applied aspect would be remediation of agricultural lands inundated by mine tailings, funded by the Bureau of Agricultural Research. The Philippines is a highly mineralized country. And our natives, the Igorots of the Angat, have been practicing small-scale gold mining even before the Spaniards came. With the coming of the Americans, that was the start of the large-scale mining, which brought about massive environmental destruction. The biggest problem is actually when the walls of the mine tailings storage ponds have been destroyed. Usually, these tailings ponds are located in river valleys, such that when the walls are broke down, you have the mine tailings, which are acidic and rich in heavy metals, flooding the rivers and inundating the productive, fertile agricultural lands along the riverbanks. Now, from my basic research, I have 2 published papers, and one is in Environment Asia. Now, this is an illustration. You have here the tailings pond along the river valley, and then when the walls break down, all the mine tailings will be on the rivers and flooding these fertile lands along the riverbanks. So all of these areas will become useless or unproductive. This is an example of an abandoned tailings pond. Notice that it has very minimal vegetation cover, and my computation is that it will take 100 years before this can be fully covered. And meanwhile, it will already be a source of erosion of sediments, which are rich in heavy metals and polluting the surrounding environment or ecosystems. This is an example of another research mining site, which is in Angat Island in Mindanao. This is a mined out area. Notice again that it is bare of vegetation. Before, this is how it looks. And then the sediments will be carried down by river system and contaminate the marine environment over here. So our rich marine ecosystems will become unproductive or with low productivity. Also, the fish that will be caught here would be contaminated. Now, in agricultural lands, we use compost as a mechanism or medium for rehabilitating the damaged agricultural lands, and so we do it quantitatively. Here, we have a crude way of weighing the compost that is to be applied. So, the output of my basic research from RCP is that soil organic matter is a very important remediation agent because it increases productivity. It is chelating heavy metals, rendering the metals less available for absorption, and the readily source of organic matter will be compost from agricultural lands. Now, I found out that the species of trichoderma are not only biofertilizer, biofungicide, and growth promoter, but they are also effective bioremediation agents since they are highly tolerant of heavy metals. Now, since I was able to publish articles from my NRCP project, I was directed in this year, 2020, to translate my research results into a policy brief. Now, my research output is how to make lands damaged by mine tailings productive again. But I shifted my policy brief because what is more important is to stop and prevent damages to the environment from mining. And because this is the source of the strong opposition of host communities to mining. So what I did was examine rules and regulations related to mining industry, and I found out that the Philippines has at least 3 laws and 8 administrative or executive orders aimed at protecting natural resources environment. Yet, despite of all these rules and regulations, environmental destruction from mining operations continue. So that my policy recommendation is to investigate why, despite of these rigid environmental rules, destruction continues. I recommended an impartial committee to be composed of independent parties, and members would be coming from the host communities and the academy. Now, the biggest question is, will the policymakers listen? Now, my current research is in another area that has been damaged by mining. This is Marinduque. It's an island between Mindoro and Quezon. So there were 2 mining companies that operated in this area, the CMI and the Mark Copper. In Mark Copper, tailings pond, you have destruction of the walls in 1993 and 1996. And again, this would be the river system where the tailings would be flowing and contaminating the rice fields. Now, in this particular project, I conducted on-farm trials on a new method of on-site composting, which will be having less labor inputs. And I got very good results. Now, the blue lines here would be for the treated bodies, and the violet ones would be for the control. Now, take a look at the dry season 2019. By the way, I conducted this in 2018 to 2019, which are El Nino years. It means there will be series of droughts. So in dry season of 2019, where the drought is severe, the treated paddies would have 2.2 tons per hectare yield, whereas the control has 0 yield. This is in uncontaminated paddies. In moderately contaminated paddies, the treated paddies would have 2 tons per hectare yield, but here again, the control will have 0. Even in the severely contaminated paddies, there is at least 1 ton per hectare yield, and the control paddies would have 0. And during mild water stress, you will see that the treated paddies would have significantly higher yield than the control. So, therefore, the new method of composting, which is just less labor inputs, spreading the rice straw in the paddy after harvest, broadcast activator, and then the compost will serve as basal fertilizer. After harvest, there is no irrigation yet, so the condition is aerobic. So within 3 weeks, the straws are decomposed. Now, the palay would be coated with TMI, and it would ensure better yield. So the practice is acceptable to farmers because we have 100 cooperators, farmer cooperators, which practice this process for 4 seasons and use increased yield with less use of pesticides. So I concluded that this practice, TMI, use of TMI and use of compost in situ is a good adapted strategy to frequent occurrence of El Nino and La Nina, which is related to global climate change. And the process focuses on soil health. So with these results, I am currently crafting an integrated rice program for 2021, which aims to pilot test this new method in 5 rice producing regions of the country and test whether this is compatible with mechanization program, and also look at the impacts on pests and pathogens dynamics, because the farmers related to me that they have minimal pests and diseases. Now, will this be also compatible with different soil types in the country? And intend also to conduct economic analysis and the impact of this process in rice production. This will be an interdisciplinary research. So I invited different researchers from the university to help me out in this project. Now, will this be funded and implemented? That again is the biggest question. Thank you. That ends my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Cuevas. Yes, truly inspiring work, especially in environment. A lot of good work in the environment. So thank you for sharing that. So our next guest is Dr. Rohel Sese. So he is currently the chairman of Ateneo de Davao's Aerospace Engineering Department. He is one of the inaugural fellows of the Carmen Fellowship Program of 2021, was named one of the top 100 Asian scientists of 2018 by Asian Scientist magazine, and was awarded one of the emerging space leaders by the International Astronautical Federation in 2012. So we greatly appreciate you being here, Dr. Sese. So yeah, take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Fred, for that introduction. For those who are in the Philippines, good morning. And for those who are in the US, good evening to you. It's my pleasure to be here to talk to you about the work that I've been doing or I did for the past 8 years, which is more on pushing for the Philippine space program. So I know a lot of you probably, when they were younger, had this interest in stars, in going to space, becoming an astronaut, and so on. So just like you guys, I was in that state as well. But this is something that I've worked since I was young and started working. In fact, I just recently moved to Ateneo de Davao this year. I was originally from UP Las Bañas, just like Dr. Cuevas. I know Dr. Cuevas and her daughter, who was incidentally my high school classmate as well. And so for today, I'll talk to you about the Philippine Space Program. So a lot of you might have heard about it in the past, and just to give you an idea on how we did it in the past 8 years, from the technology development all the way up to policy legislation, and talking to politicians and decision makers, which a lot of scientists do not like to do. But let me start off with give you a landscape of what is happening, an overview of the landscape of what is happening in space. And what is happening right now is that space is currently being democratized to the point that when you look at the number of space programs that has been going on in the world this current time, it has significantly increased compared to what it was in the past 50 or 60 years. Before, it was only around a handful of countries, the US included, of course. But now we can see more and more countries starting their own space program and even starting their own space agencies. So just in the past 5 years alone, there are about 13 countries that started their own national space agencies. And the latest and the youngest among all these countries is actually the Philippines, which started its own Philippine Space Agency in August of 2019. That's based on the law. So we can consider what we call the Philippines as an emerging space nation. But despite this late entry into the space race or space age, we have been doing a lot of space-related activities all the way from the 1800s. So in the 1800s, the Observatorio Meteorologico de Manila, or what we now know as Manila Observatory under Ateneo de Manila University, started doing optical and radio astronomy all the way to the 1970s. Also in the 1970s, we actually had our own rocket development program, which was called Project Santa Barbara. So this was done by Filipino scientists. So the challenge was to produce a liquid fuel rocket within 30 days. But as Filipinos, we didn't do it in 30 days. We did it in 25 days. So that's a very big achievement at that time. We're also a member of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space since 1977, and we had our own for our telecommunications satellite in 1997 as well. And for the past few years, we have been very active in a lot of cooperation agreements, most notable of which is the Sentinel Asia, which is a network of constellations or countries working together for disaster management. And in 2016, we even hosted the 23rd Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum. So this shows that the Philippines is now becoming more active in the international stage when it comes to space-related activities. We have signed three of the 5 outer space treaties, and we ratified the Moon Treaty of 1979. Now, one of the questions that we usually get is why would a country such as the Philippines, which is a developing country, work on having a national space program? Because when you talk about space, most of the time it's all about looking at the stars, going to space, exploring Mars, exploring the moon, and so on. But what most people don't realize is that a lot of the benefits or the technology that we are using nowadays actually came from space-related research and development activities. And in addition to that, there are a lot of applications for a national space program, especially for a country like the Philippines, because this is what more and more developing countries are realizing now, that at this day and age, space is no longer a luxury, but already a necessity, even for developing countries, because it has applications in various areas, such as agriculture, fisheries, environment and land use monitoring, communications, especially. Bridging the digital divide is one of the very pressing challenges now, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. For an archipelago like the Philippines, wherein we're struck by typhoon almost 20 times a year, using satellite technology is one of the means to connect even the remote and isolated communities throughout the country. And this is actually related to one of the projects I'm handling right now, wherein we're putting up satellite antenna to connect isolated communities, even the indigenous people. Just yesterday, I was in Lake Cebu talking with the Tiboli tribe and how to bring connectivity for their schools. So that's one of the things that we're rolling out until next month. This also entails providing social services such as telemedicine, having remote barangay health units connected with experts in hospitals in Manila, in Cebu, or in Davao. Disaster management is also one of the biggest applications, especially for a country like the Philippines. And this has been shown during Typhoon Yolanda, wherein after the typhoon struck, the only way that people can talk to with the rest of the country was through satellite communications. The only way that we can see the extent of the damage of Typhoon Yolanda or Typhoon Haiyan was through the use of satellite imagery. Of course, there are also other indirect benefits, such as improving trade and economic growth. We did a cost-benefit analysis a few years back, and we found out that for every peso that the Philippines would invest in the national space program, the average return of investment is around 2.4 pesos. This is a very conservative estimate because globally the average is around for every dollar invested in the national space program, it would have a return of anywhere from $4 to $7. And there are applications, of course, in science and technology, in defense and security as well, and even in the international diplomacy. So this goes to show that how space is very now pervasive now in our environment or in our society nowadays. So the work on creating a Philippine Space Agency actually started several years back. I came back to the Philippines in 2011 after my PhD and work in Japan. So I came back with a mission of improving the space capabilities of the Philippines, and part of this is actually pushing for a national space agency. So in 2013, we conducted the baseline research assessment on space activities and infrastructure. Basically, this was a survey of infrastructure and human assets that is currently present in the country during that time. One of the offshoots of this was the realization that in order for the Philippines to progress in the space field, we need to have a policy and an agency that will handle all these space-related activities. And this is where we crafted the National Space Development and Utilization Policy based on the analysis of foreign space policies and programs. We did also a multi-sectoral stakeholder consultation from academe, government, industry, and even the defense sector. We had our first technical cooperation with Japan in 2014 with the launch of the Diwata 1 in 2016. So we have 2 microsatellites and 1 CubeSat. But currently now we only have Diwata 2 and Maya 1, which is the CubeSat. So Diwata 1 deorbited earlier this year. And then also to bridge the tide or bridge the change in administration that happened in 2016. We worked on the National Space Development Program. So this is where we did the cost-benefit analysis, established the key space roadmaps and agenda, and basically laid out the plan for Philippine space development in the next 10 years. And once the 2016, with the new administration that came in, we started the legislation process. And what this is actually a landmark because normally laws in the Philippines takes anywhere from 9 to 12 years to get passed, but we did it in only 3 years. And this is in a single session of Congress, we did it in 3 years. So this goes to show that yes, it is possible to change the science policy here in the Philippines, as long as you really put a lot of effort in it. And based on experience, politicians would actually listen if you explain to them in a manner that they can understand and they can relate to. So this is one of the misconceptions that we usually have. As part of the National Space Development Program, which is the USDP shared funded program, we worked on this 4 different roadmaps, namely the National Space Research and Development Agenda, the Satellite Development Roadmap, the Data Sharing and Management Policy, and even the Space Industry Development Roadmap. And one of the things that I'm very excited here is in the Space Industry Development Roadmap is when we identified what are the niche areas of the Philippines wherein we can actually work towards cooperating with other space nations. One of the most areas with the biggest potential is actually launch vehicle services, because believe it or not, the Philippines is actually a very good launch site for rockets. Probably not in the same level as what they have in the US in Cape Canaveral or in Florida, but good enough to launch microsatellites or small satellites from our own territory. And this we actually know right now where this location actually is. So in 2019, after 3 years of lobbying, Republic Act 11363 was enacted into law. And this is the Philippine Space Act, which enacts it creates both the Philippine Space Agency and the Philippine Space Development and Utilization Policy. And this is unique in the world because I think we are the only country in the world that at the very early stages of its space development program, we focused not just on the technology and on the space agency, but also putting or laying down the space policy as well. Because normally in other countries, space policy comes in decades after it. So we are the only country that did it right from the very beginning. And this is actually one of the things that we can serve as a role model in the international community. So in the Philippine space policy, it focuses on 6 key development areas on why we are doing a national space program. This is listed as national security and development, hazard management and climate studies, space research and development, space industry capacity building, space education and awareness, and eventually international cooperation as well. So you can just look this up in the website of Official Gazette. Just look up Republic Act 11363 and you can see the whole text. This is the work that I have been doing or I've been writing for the past 3 years before it was eventually enacted into law. So this mandate of the law also mandates the space agency as a primary policy planning, coordinating administrative entity of the government. And unlike other space agencies in the world, or unlike most space agencies in the world, the space agency in the Philippines is actually attached directly under the office of the president, because this is based on the understanding that the impact that space can actually provide to the country goes beyond just science and technology. It has impacts also in other areas such as agriculture, security, environment, natural resources, communications, and so on. So hopefully in the next 2-3 years, everything will be set up, and the headquarters in Clark will be established as well. There's an allocation for 30 hectares as well in Clark, and the funding as well will be put in, and the law also places the funding there. So that's just an overview of what is more or less in store for the Philippines in the in the coming years when it comes to space development. There's a lot of things that are going on. It's still the Philippine Space Agency is still in the process of being established. Hopefully, it all goes well. And I'd like to end my talk here with part of the foreword from the Project Santa Barbara, the rocket development program in the 1970s. And while it talks about Project Santa Barbara, this is very much related or applicable as well to the Philippine space program, because it says here that it's an affirmation of our desire to rely on our own resources, to use our own resources, to harness the innate capability of our people, so we may improve the quality of our lives and preserve the sovereignty of the Filipino nation. True, we live in an era of interdependence, but the fact remains that a nation, first of all, must be self-reliant, progressive, in order to take its rightful place in the family of nations and maintain it with dignity and respect. And with that, I'll end my talk, and I would be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Sese, for explaining very interestingly the Philippine space program. I'm sure a lot of people learned a lot from that. So thank you. So now we're going to be moving on to the question portion. So I have a general question for all of you. I mean, Dr. Cuevas and Dr. Sese, you both mentioned that you work in policymaking, so I'm sure you have a lot of interaction with governments, government officials, and Kirby with administration, since you the Bulasan Center in the university. So I'm sure that you've faced pushbacks, being within like some sort in an institution in some sort of way. How have you persevered through these pushbacks? If you want to share.
Okay, I'll be the first one to answer. Doing research is my passion. So whatever obstacles there are on the path, I just persevere, try and try until you succeed. That's how I overcome all the obstacles. You try to look at the different pathways by which you can solve the problem. Okay.
Thank you. And yeah, Kirby
Okay.
and Dr. Sesay, yeah.
I think I'll go along the same lines what Dr. Cuevas mentioned. Yes, there are things that would actually push you back a bit. When we were starting the space program or legislation for the space program, the public reaction was actually very negative, but it was actually through proper planning and proper communication and engagement with stakeholders that you can actually get a lot of people who would help you out. And at the end of the day, it's all about doing what you know, doing the things that you know will benefit the country. And despite all the odds, back in 2012, when we started this work, when we were saying we're going to have a space program, people were saying not in this lifetime. Yet here we are right now in 2019, 2020, and it means that it really it's really possible that we can change the landscape of science and technology as long as we really push hard and dedicate our efforts. I think the best way to describe this is what Dory from Finding Nemo said: just keep swimming. You swim against the tide, against the tides. You swim no matter how hard the current is, because eventually you would get to the destination that you want to be in or where you want to go.
Thank you, Dr. Sesay. And Kirby,
Yeah, I actually like that phrase from Dr. Cesar, like just keep swimming. Yeah. And I guess for us here in the US, for the Filipino Americans here in the US, it's really finding your community and uplifting one another. That's how we created the Bolosan Center. We really just found each other and on campus, and then really, kept swimming and kept, pushing back. And now we have the center and the funding from the state to actually do research for our community. So yeah, find your community and then keep swimming. Because if you remember from Nemo, there's a school of fish. Is that the word, school of fish? Swimming together.
All right, thank you, all of you. So now I'm going to ask some specific questions. So, Dr. Cuevas.
Yes.
So how can Filipino and Filipino American scientists in the United States help in protecting our ecosystems in the Philippines?
That's a very complicated question, because the state of our natural resources heavily depleted and degraded, because the factors affecting its utilization goes from social, political, economic. So you cannot just prescribe one solution. You have to involve everybody, all the stakeholders, the communities where the resources are located, the policymakers, the scientists and the research workers, and those people who understand the problem. We are a very rich. The Philippines belong to the top 18 mega diverse countries, and we are also the hotspot for biodiversity conservation, because there are lots of species that are getting extinct, but yet there are also species that are still being discovered. That's how rich our biodiversity is. But number one problem is poverty. So we have to solve the poverty issue first, so that our local communities will be able to take good care of the resources on which their livelihood depends. So it's a long process, it's complicated, it should be multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And those of us in the environment and ecology section are doing our best. We are binding together in order to overcome this difficulty. There are already some positive developments. DNR, together with the different scientists from all over the country, have already identified several these protected areas, both in terrestrial and in the marine aquatic ecosystems. So we are going there, but very slowly, because we have to solve all the problems that are affecting the depletion and degradation of our resources.
Thank you, Dr. Cuevas. Yeah, I mean, environmental work, it's hard. Not an easy one, but that's, people persevere through it. So yeah, thank you. Question for Dr. Sese. So what are the limitations and advantages of the space agency being attached to the Office of the Philippines?
Okay, I think you mean being attached to the Office of the President. Okay. Well, one of the biggest advantage is because space science and technology is actually a very broad area, and it has a lot of applications, not just in science and technology, just like I mentioned. Placing it directly under the office of the head of state, which some countries have done actually, gives it a greater leeway or a greater opportunity to work with other departments like Department of Agriculture, Department of Communication, ICT, Environment and Natural Resources, and so on. So it places that, it gives a much bigger mandate and a much bigger flexibility in terms of working. So it can now have what we call a whole of government approach in terms of promoting or pushing for space development. The disadvantage, of course, is being placed under the Office of the President. At some point, it can become the position itself can become a little political, and this is something that we have understood early on. That's why in the law itself, there is a place there, it's placed there, the qualifications on who can lead the space agency. So it cannot just be any political appointee that out of nowhere came and without any clear understanding, because space development takes a lot of time. You have to plan more in the long term, not beyond the 6 years of the term of a president here in the Philippines. So having those qualifications, not just for the head, but even for not just for the Director General, but also the Deputy Director General. There are 3 Deputy Director Generals. 2 of them have to be what we call career executives. So people who have been working in government and in this field for quite some time. And even the head of the space agency needs to come from a field that is very much related to space. So those are the things that we have placed in the law itself to minimize those risks.
Thank you, Dr. Sese. Question for Kirby. So how can we foster interest in learning about Filipino history early on in Filipino Americans who have had minimal exposure to their Filipino heritage?
One way is to push for ethnic studies. So if you're in a campus that has a campaign, if you have ethnic studies on campus, definitely enroll in some classes, because those numbers actually help in maintaining the funding for these programs. But also not just within the campuses, pushing for ethnic studies outside the universities, in the elementary school, in high school. There's always a campaign. If you're familiar, California has a lot of campaigns to push for ethnic studies to include the stories and histories of Filipino Americans in the curriculum in the state of California. So if there's a similar campaign in your state or in your town, push for it. Sometimes ethnic studies starts in your own neighborhood, in the local schools, and really also pushing for ethnic studies, not just in the institutions of learning like an elementary school or university, but also in the community. So if you can host a workshop, if you can, or even host an event where you can share experiences, share family history, because again, Filipino American history is also rooted in the histories of our own families, our own experiences. And even at home, you can even start it at home by just asking your grandparents, asking your parents how they got here, how was their experience in the first years living in America, assimilating in this community where we're often seen as the other, we're often seen as menace. And at one point we were targeted by racist violence, and that they told that they're going to burn an entire town if they don't get rid of Filipinos. That was in the 1930s. So there's a lot of history that Filipino American history that's yet to be told. There's a lot of stories that are not yet told, and it all begins at home. So a lot of our histories are actually at home. So again, I guess the short answer is to start at home, and start learning about your own family's experiences to relate it to the younger generation. That we're not just here, we're here. We're here for a reason.
Yes, we are very much here for a reason. So thank you for sharing. We have time for one last question. If we didn't get to your question, I do apologize. We were just in a limited time frame here, but we will take the questions that you asked. We have them all written down. Send the speakers to write down, and then we'll email it to everyone to see. Before our final question to all the speakers, this is a general question. So can you share some lessons learned moving the needle in your sector and improving our society?
Okay. I'm sorry, I get lost. What was the question? Can somebody answer first?
Yeah, so can you share some lessons learned moving through, I guess, your position, your sector, your field, and improving our society?
The last 2 days, we have just a workshop in the National Academy of Science and Technology, where I am elected as a member. We were doing foresight, but we did SWOT, that's strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat, and then TOWS. So what we are trying to do is to examine the different factors. The foresight is what we would want the Philippines to be in 2040, that's 30 years from now, and how do we get to that foresight. So we examine first the strength, the opportunities, the weaknesses, and threat. So what I'm saying is, you really have to bind or to join the organization with a common interest of pushing the Philippines to a better place, both economically and socio-culturally and politically. So when you have a common goal of pushing the country forward, then this cooperation among different sectors of the science and technology and innovation sector, you can push forward and come up with policies or recommendations or strategies that will push our country forward using science, technology, and innovation.
Okay. So I guess I'll follow along that line, but I would like to start with, I think, a message to everyone that yes, it is possible to change the science policy landscape here in the Philippines. We were able to do it. If we were able to do it in the field of space, which is literally and figuratively out of this world, making politicians understand why we need it, then it is possible to do it for any other field of science. I think that's one of the biggest takeaway or lesson that we can share. But it takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of proper engagement and involving a lot of people in your cause, in pushing your advocacy, goes a long way. You'll be surprised how many people will become your allies if you explain to them why this is important, why we are doing this. It's a matter of communicating it properly, proper science communication, which is always a challenge, especially for very technical fields. But if you were able to manage, or you managed to overcome that obstacle, then it can go a long way. Getting a lot of people involved and knowing what your end goal, knowing what you want to achieve for a better country. And at the end of the day, it's all about improving the lives of our fellow countrymen, improving the state of here in the Philippines, and working on how we can working together towards a better future for everyone. I think that is the biggest thing that you always have to keep in mind on why you are doing this, because this is what would be the best or what would benefit mankind as a whole.
collective effort.
Yes. Thanks, Dr. Sese and Dr. Cuevas for actually, that was actually what I was going to say, collective effort. Yeah, so don't be afraid. Oh, one, my advice first for the younger Filipino scientists here in the US is don't doubt yourself. A lot of the times, these institutions that we're in, we are told to doubt ourselves. We are told that we're not enough. We're not smart enough. You know, they always, you know, I'm not going to go into the racist part, but yeah, don't doubt yourself. You're there for a reason. You're learning for a reason. And another advice would be don't be afraid to take action to find unity in your communities. And you know, we live in America, in a society where individuality is always, you know, put at the pedestal. There's actually power in collective action, in finding community and being out there in the community. Again, today is this month is October is Filipino American History Month, and we can really learn a lot from the Manongs, from the earliest generations of Filipino American workers in the U.S., where they found power by coming together in taking action and uniting with other communities, not just Filipinos, but other peoples of color, and fighting for the collective rights of the farm workers. It's one of the historic labor movements in the history of the world. And really, just to fun fact, another advice would be don't isolate yourselves in the university. You really need to get out there. You really need to learn from the community. In fact, the Manongs loved it back then when college students would actually come out and join them. There's even stories of Manongs who because a lot of them did not have kids, so they pooled their money to send a young Filipino American to school because the young Filipino American did not have money to go to school. And now he's a history professor, and now he teaches the Manong's history. So again, don't be afraid to find unity in your community. Don't be afraid to take collective action, and don't doubt yourself.
Thank you, Kirby. So this concludes the end of the Q&A session of our anniversary event today. Thank you so much to the guest speakers. You all have done wonderful work, which is why you're here to speak with us today. And then we're grateful to hear all your wonderful advice. And thank you for asking or answering questions. So yeah, Carla, are we gonna shout out the events? Yeah, okay. So yeah, once again, thank you to all the speakers and thank you to all the participants for being here and listening to our wonderful speakers. So tomorrow we will have a panel presentation with Filipino community builders at 6:45 Eastern Standard Time with special guest Kieran Macapugay, Poetry Ranka Manis, Dr. Robin Rodriguez, and Dr. Reina Reyes. Be sure to attend that event. And this will be the final event of ASA's Angat Utilizing Science for Change anniversary series. At the conclusion of the event, we'll be revealing the winners of the AFSA elections and then your next AFSA executive committee. So yes, very important event, concluding event. So please come out for that. And we also have two other events coming up. Well, one ongoing event, but one event called Decolonizing Science, Science for Liberation, Tuesday, October 27th from 6 to 8 Eastern Standard Time. And obviously we have our Kumustahans every Wednesday, and we always talk about a different topic every week. So always interesting just to chill, you know, with your community, our AFSA community. So thank you. Yeah, and then that concludes our event. So have a good night, everyone. Carla, did you have any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, can we actually give some time to actually take pictures and also maybe give a round of applause to our speakers for really spending some time with us, especially to our speakers from the Philippines who really wake up very early.
No, it's a normal wake up time.
All right, thank you. I guess we could just, all participants could just probably unmute themselves, and or if you're just okay with your reactions, then you could just clap. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Happy anniversary.
You're also inspiring.
Thank you.
I know I learned a lot too.
Ma'am Cuevas, I was your in UKLB.
Really? Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I have
for a bit, but I'm also taking pictures if folks want to showed their photos real quick. Okay, I'm gonna do one right now. 1, 2, 3. Happy anniversary, Afsa! All right, one more.
Congratulations!
1,
Congratulations!
2, 3.
Congratulations, Sansa.
Happy anniversary!
Happy
Thank you so
anniversary.
much, Dr. Cuevas,
Happy
Dr. Sese, and Kirby. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Salamat.
much.
Happy anniversary.
Ingat.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you again for having us.
Oh, stop the yes.
Thank you, Kirby.
Oh, you're still recording.
Wow, amazing, y'all.
Don't want to leave yet.
I know. I learned a lot myself. Like, wow.
Another round of speakers. Let's go.
Let's have
Yes,
opposites.
Shihan, you want to talk?
We have Dr. Rose
Can
here.
Can we hear from you, please?
What? Who is it, Dr. Rose?
No, that was me. I want